design. I mean, you can think of it as, oh, somebody designed this, or that's a nice painting, things like that. But what it really came down to was that design is the process that someone goes through in creating something. So whether it be a product or a painting, a car, a house, they definitely think about what is is color. And we really perceive or interact with color in two ways. The first is a more subconscious way, and that is that when we look at this wonderfully red Ferrari, masculinity, ferocity, these very powerful emotions, it has the same aggressive lines, it has the same sleek yet appealing form. However, the color seems odd to us, not necessarily the same as what the car is designed for. Now, next element is texture. I found texture to be really interesting, and that's because it's a tactile sense. So, right now, I feel this. It's smooth. My pants are a little warm and dirty. As we look at this painting, though, you can't feel that. You can't touch it. However, what's happening is our mind is thinking back to this, and it's thinking, or your mind is thinking, what did I feel then? What did I think about then? So perhaps, I remember laying in the grass or something like this woman. I feel happy. I feel like that's something pleasant. And therefore, the last element is pattern. Here we have the Guggenheim Museum, and this really demonstrates the use of pattern well. We have two patterns, though. We have the vertical pattern. We have each floor going down, and then we have, I guess, the horizontal pattern of the floors curving around. So what pleases us about this pattern is one that it defies our expectations, but within boundaries. So as, for instance, now that we have the elements of design, the building blocks, as I said, are Legos, the question arises, how do you put two Legos together? Can you just stick them next to each other and assume that they'll stay in that shape, or do you have to stack them, what have you? So the principles are really governing that. How can you take these elements and combine them or organize them? So we have scale, balance, rhythm, proximity, emphasis, and unity. The first one, scale, is probably what you're thinking of. And the majority of people will associate scale based on something familiar to you. In most cases, your body. So this cathedral, I believe it's in the Gothic style, was designed in order to perhaps remind you of religion or God's presence everywhere. So as the next principle of design is balance. Here we have a pretty awesome mobile. And the interesting thing about this is that when you first look at it, you might think it's unbalanced. So we have, scale or size. So we have all of these small things over here compared to this gigantic shape over there. Seems like, oh. The next principle is rhythm. So rhythm's interesting. It's different from pattern. It's not just the repetition of the same thing over again, but it's really the use of one idea in different ways, taking something and applying it over and over again, but differently each time. So in this example, we really have the use of a right angle, or the use of lines. As you can see on the wall on the left, you start with a harsh vertical line, same on the right. And you have this doorway, tons of 90-degree thing that you've taken, with straight lines, and you keep using that, but in different ways. So in this building, rhythm has been achieved. The next principle is proximity. Now, here we have the creation scene from the Sistine Chapel. Proximity is used in this painting to really use of proximity informed of by just the lack, or, well, I guess proximity, but then lack of connection. The next principle is emphasis. So here we have a very nice Edward Hopper painting, and I believe personally that the lighthouse tower itself is emphasized over the elements we've already talked about. So number one, we have color, okay? We have the dark shaded area in the lighthouse compared to the very light background of the sky. There's very high contrast there. of the tower, emphasis, to create focus on. The last principle is unity. Now, unity is slightly different from the other principles. It's not necessarily a way to, combine two things, but it's more of an overarching principle. In my mind, it's, has this design succeeded? So, in this case, we have Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. Now, to me, the goal of this house was to make it fit in with its surroundings, make it seem like it's a part of the natural environment that it's in. So, now that we have our building blocks, we have our Legos, and we know how to put them together, we know they can fit on top of each other as side by side, the question comes around, what do I want to make? What is it that I'm designing and why? Perhaps even, who am I designing it for? So I wanted to understand what goes into this process from thinking up an idea and then creating it. I found the best way to do this was by looking at some contemporaries most of you are familiar with. So Apple Computer has really taken a lot of the ideas for its design process from the Bauhaus movement in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s. So the Bauhaus really emphasized that you should pick a human need. You should take a need that must be addressed. So like this, we have a need. Now the Bauhaus would say you need to address that need as simply as possible. So in the function of the computer, it said, how can we make this usable? So we have a full-size keyboard, we have a full-size screen, we have to meet that need. Now, another perhaps comparable design would be this Dell computer. It's performing the same function, basically. You have powerful computing, I guess long battery life because it plugs into an outlet. You can do the exact same things with this as you could the MacBook Air. However, it doesn't put an emphasis on the form. It doesn't say, we're going to make this really sleek, we're going to make this really appealing, because Dell puts more of an emphasis on cost. Does this meet the needs of the consumers we're appealing to? I think Dell does, I think Apple does. Sony, maybe not. So here we have something that is really cool. It's a super small laptop, it's about that big. So Sony said, we're going to focus on form first. We're going to say, how can we make this really cool, sleek computer that takes away. Sony has done something cool. They've made a design that is aesthetically pleasing. However, it doesn't achieve the function that its consumers need. In that way, I would say that Sony has failed. As we've looked at all these, we've been trying to look at what is good design. And I've been wondering the same thing. What is it? How do you say this one thing is designed better than something other? And I think it's very difficult to do. So what I've decided is the best way to look at this, I think, as I probably said while we were looking at the companies, is that does this meet the need that it's addressing? So it wasn't functional. It didn't meet the need of the user, whereas the Apple did, and did it while looking nice. So as a user, I think there are three things to look at. I've already mentioned. We have form, cost, and function. So each of these, I think, is a sliding scale. It looks really cool. It has an awesome form, I think. You can see through it. It's clear, reminding you of the perhaps purity of the water in it, making you think, I know that's cool, and that looks awesome. But perhaps it's not for everybody. So the next thing to look at is cost. Here we have 3 water bottles, which are very inexpensive. However, they aren't nearly as form. We have function. So this Nalgene bottle, it doesn't look that nice. It's not terribly inexpensive, but it meets the need, in this case, of a camping person, a Thacher student who has to, go to class with this. 3 designs are very different. They're all equally.
Ayun, I know. Nice design.